welcome to 15 Minutes in Canberra. My name is Hayley Channer and I work for the Perth US Asia Centre. Today we're talking to my good friend Matthew DeLeo. Matt works for DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and he's going to give us some of his insights into his career and personal life working for government and growing up in Perth. Matt, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Hayley, and it's great to be the first guest on your podcast.
So Matt, we've worked together before at the Department of Defence, and I know that you've had a background working in Austrade, but give our listeners a little bit of background into how you came to move from Perth to Canberra and how you came to work for government.
Well, it's a bit of a meandering tale because I was growing up in Kalamunda, which is outside of Perth, which probably some of your listeners will think is, the country, but I swear it's part of the city. And I wanted to be a journo when I started, and I thought, a good way to kind of crack that would be to have a broad level of education. I was interested in politics and history too, so I thought if I can combine a love of writing with politics, and maybe I could be a foreign correspondent. But turns out it's a little bit harder than I thought to do that sort of thing. And I didn't have a lot of, let's say, government or international relations focused role models in my life growing up. We had a pretty neat, pretty tight family, but there were a lot of tradies. There's a few professionals, but my dad was the first in his family to go to uni, for example. So you
didn't come from a family of diplomats then?
No, not a family of diplomats, and it was very unusual, and to me it was an abstract concept growing up. I thought I'd kind of like kick it around and see what would happen with journalism, and did a few internships and things, and I didn't like it. I think I just didn't get into the mold of asking the questions in a way which you really need to. Maybe I wasn't dogged enough in that kind of, grizzled stereotype way. So then, I started traveling a little bit. I did some exchange overseas. And then I came back and thought, well, look, I want to do a master's degree in international politics and really explore this. And that was when I came across DFAT. I mean, look, it might sound ridiculous to some of your listeners as well, but I didn't really gather DFAT or, the Australian government's international organs as a concept until I was in my early 20s. Might seem a bit naive, but it just wasn't something that I was confronted with much. And, international diplomacy was a thing that, a rarefied, really detached elite did. And it didn't seem like something that a kid like me could touch.
Well, I mean, I grew up at the Gold Coast and I had to come to the stark realization that I really did need to leave the Gold Coast to have a career in foreign affairs.
Totally, unless, you could be involved in tourism at least, but,
that's right.
A little bit limiting. And Perth, in some ways, was the same, but it also could have been just the circles that I was hanging out in. So when I went to Melbourne, I started to meet a lot of people that were either in and around the circuit, and in that sense, I mean, like they might have been the children of diplomats themselves. Lecturers that I had at university. I got involved in a non-profit organisation over there called the Australian Institute of International Affairs.
Ostensibly to
meet people. You know it well as well. Yes. That's right. You're a former alumni, I forget.
Intern.
And it helps because then you start to kind of meet people who've been involved in the profession, and it's demystified. And so through that, I kind of like gathered experience and contacts, and it came time finally for me to actually apply for graduate programs. And I was in Victoria then, and I really liked living in Melbourne, so I'd applied for the Victorian Government grad program, but I also applied for DFAT, and I didn't get in. And funnily enough, ironically, there were friends of mine from class who had applied for both programs too, and I got through the VicGov one. They didn't, and so I always held that over them as an example of how much more professional and prepared I was. But they are DFAT employees, and they've had really successful careers as well. But they got a jump start on me, and I think at the time I didn't know what to think about it, but
it's hard when you get knocked back.
Well, it was. And, when the first few times you go through something like this, when you apply for jobs and you get kind of knocked to the side, you wonder if it's something wrong with you or, will you ever make it? You have all these catastrophic scenarios. But the reality is it's all a moment in time analysis. And, you know, whoever was in that pool might have written a better application. They might have interviewed stronger than you did. So you just don't take it personally. And so you just bounce back up and go again. But I think that getting a job in that graduate program with the VIX was one of the best things that could happen, because I was trained in a broader form of policy making and also program management that really set me up with the skills that I needed and then could draw on for future roles that I had. And, you know, and things kind of take on a life of their own from there, because from Victoria, I met people that worked at Austrade, the Australian Trade Commission, and, you know, we worked together, some things went well, and they offered me a job. And Austrade was one of those places that I had kind of looked at with DFAT and...
So is Austrade part of DFAT?
It's in the portfolio, yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's in the broader portfolio.
So you're basically sort of on the outskirts. You're still in the tent now.
Yes. Yeah. So it was, so I guess at that point it sort of walked into the tent, a very broad tent. But, you know, the work is, different in the sense of it was far more, you know, practical, action orientated, in that you were working with Australian companies and international companies. So it was all international focused work, but it was less, say, on the policy making side and more on the, you know, implementation side. It was very exciting. And I got to do some great things there. And from Austrade, you know, things kind of moved again, but I wanted a kind of a different experience. And that's why I joined the Department of Defence, which again was, you know, a combination of just luck and being in the right place. I had met people who were working there. They thought that I had an interesting perspective. And so they put you in touch with people who can encourage you to make applications. They can look through things for you and make sure that you're in the right position to get a job. And that's where I met you, of course. And, you know, everything fantastic happened from that point, of course, Hayley, as I say.
But also, this is something that people might not know. The Department of Defence has a very strong international section full of people who are foreign affairs nerds.
Absolutely. And I think, you know, if there's one thing that I would have liked to have known when I was in my early 20s is that don't be blinkered and think that there is really only one place, either in government or elsewhere, that you can do international focus work. You can do it in a whole range of places. And, you know, there are the traditional agencies. DFAT, you know, Defence with its international network, Home Affairs has this as well. But, you know, Prime Minister and Cabinet has a big international division. You know, Departments of Agriculture have people posted overseas doing trade and market access, education, and of course, then the other agencies around as well. So I think being broad and open-minded about the kind of work you can do, because those skills are valuable in so many different places. But yeah, I mean, defence was different. I don't know when I was at uni that I think I had almost casted off a shortlist because I was, you know, borderline a little bit bolshy and thought, I don't know if I want to work for defence. But it was some of the most interesting stuff I've done.
Doesn't it? You know, that it's quite militaristic and...
Yeah, it does. And I don't know how you found it because, you know, I think we're also from maybe a more academic background, but you just rubbed shoulders with some people that had done some cool things. Definitely. And you're working on issues that were at the forefront of, you know, most pressing security questions of our time in terms of Australia's interests. And, you know, I got to do things like go and represent Australia at the NATO College in Rome. Now, why was I doing that? If you asked me that before, I would have said, well, that seems ridiculous. But I got there and you understand the stuff and you meet the people from, you know, all across the alliance. And, you know, you're at this defence college and you're in the mess kind of shuffling your tray next to these colonels. And, you know, I don't know how seriously they took me as a kid who's never picked up a gun. But, you know, we had interesting conversations about things and we sort of pressed back and forth our issues. And I wouldn't have thought you could have done that at Defence before I joined.
So, Matt, you now work with DFAT. You're based at the Australian Embassy in Seoul in South Korea. What's it been like for you over there? Have you been really affected by the virus, by COVID-19, and how have you found the other staff you're working with?
Yeah, it's an interesting decision to move during a pandemic. But look, in terms of places that have been affected, Seoul, you know, has a few hundred cases a day. It was up to 1,000 not long ago. So there are restrictions. We can't gather in groups of more than 4. Things close early. But what has happened is, you've got a very supportive embassy community. People really band together over here. And so you never really felt like you were, alone in anything. There's always people that support you. And the work is still really important. I mean, there's the high impact stuff of the Australians that are caught overseas who are trying to get home. But then there is also the ongoing relationship stuff that we're trying to manage with the Republic of Korea. And that stems right across from the trade relationship where, they are our fourth largest trading partner to the, security dynamic, the very difficult question of, North Korea. And again, the Republic of Korea's position in the Indo-Pacific and, our views on the world, which are really similar. So there's a lot that we can do. And there's a lot that we have to keep pressing, even though it's a very tricky environment to do it. Meetings have been hard to get, for example.
I don't know if you've met many South Koreans yet, but when I was in South Korea just on holiday, I found South Koreans so much like Australians, particularly in their sense of humour. And how sort of blunt and direct they are. So I was surprised by that and really loved South Korea. So you're very lucky. As you know, a lot of people would love to work for DFAT, and we've gone through, a few other different career paths that they could take in terms of other international affairs areas of departments. But say you're really, really keen to get into DFAT. It is competitive. Obviously, a lot of people would love to work there. Can you give people sort of 3 key tips, if they were aspiring and just recently finished university or even just looking for a career change? What are 3 key things that they should be focused on?
I think, first of all, there's no cookie cutter. So have an open mind is what I'd say. Like, it's good. You have to have a goal and know where you want to get to, but don't think that you need to kind of roll off the arts law production line to get a job with DFAT. I mean, some of the most interesting people I've met who've worked there have had backgrounds which are, one fellow's a slam poet. Right? He's a slam poet and got a job. There are journos out there. There are, there's a marine biologist I've met who's kicking around, some chemical engineers, people who've worked for airlines, people who have done things that are outside the norm. And that just means that you've got a different perspective and you get away from the groupthink. And I guess getting back to what that means for each individual is don't feel like, you have nothing valuable to add. You'll have a unique selling point. And DFAT will look at that, like other agencies will look at that, because everyone's looking to increase the diversity. Yes, I mean, you've got to know your stuff and demonstrate an understanding and a passion for it, but don't be afraid to be yourself as well. I'd say again, look for opportunities to volunteer. To look for agencies, not-for-profits and that sort of thing who are involved in the space that you're interested in. Because it's a way to, I guess, test your understanding of issues, because people will come at it from a different direction, but also to meet people who could act as role models if you've not had a chance to have those sorts of role models before. And will also then, if you're lucky, could introduce you to other people who may have different opportunities. But, it's being open-minded, but putting yourself in the position where you're meeting people. And you're also helping an organisation who many of these small advocacy groups or not-for-profits, they run off the smell of an oily rag. So you're contributing something to them while you're hopefully getting something interesting in return. And the third thing I say would be perseverance. You've just got to keep kind of having a go.
It's so true, isn't it? For every job, perseverance or tenacity.
Totally, because you will get knocked back for various things at various times, and then things will happen, and that'll be great, and you think you're kind of on a roll, and then you get knocked again. And sometimes it can feel like you're in a bit of a treadmill. Even within DFAT, there are things that come up all the time, and the South Korea job was I'd applied for postings before as well. I didn't get it on my first go. It's rare that people do, but it happens. But you keep going and you try again and again. And then if you keep at it, things will happen. You've got to do a lot of other things in the background too. It's not going to fall into your lap, but just don't be disheartened is what I'd say. So persevere. That'd be my tips.
That's great. I think that really rings true for me personally. Now, this isn't the first time you've been overseas. I know that a lot of people, if they are looking at a career in foreign affairs, will travel overseas. Has there been anything weird or interesting or wonderful that's happened to you when you've been overseas, whether it's now in Seoul or somewhere else?
Yeah. I mean, there's a few little stories and anecdotes, but there was one that I had when I was in China, actually. And I had met with a state-owned enterprise, and we were talking about, some particular things. It was a lot cooperative, it was really constructive. And then we went to the chairman's private dining room afterwards, and we're sitting out the back there with him, and there's a group of, I don't know, maybe 15 people. I didn't speak any Mandarin, and so there was an interpreter and some others. And the chairman at one point made a joke, and you can tell because everyone they look at you and they kind of laugh. And so you just kind of
because
wait
they laugh before the translator. Translation has happened.
Before. Now, it won't.
So you already know you're primed to laugh, correct?
I'm kind of primed to laugh. And also, this is one of those things where, look, I am of Italian background, so I've got, darker features. So, when you travel to certain places, some people aren't, immediately recognize the fact that you're Australian. They just don't get it straight away. So I've had that happen in places I think, sure, I'm waiting for it. And so the chairman, through the interpreter, says to me, I just want to know if you're Australian. And so, and I'm preparing for the answer about my family heritage. And so I said, that's interesting. Why does he say that? And it comes back as, because you know how to use chopsticks and you're not fat. And so, you kind of laugh, and you take that in the spirit of directness that some cultures have. But you kind of sit there and you go, wow, I've been skewered here. So, there are plenty of other little tales like that, and these things, you sort of collect them over time. But that's kind of stuck with me as an interesting cultural interactive moment.
Definitely. Well, Matt, thank you so much. I regret we only have 15 minutes, but this has been very valuable. I wish you all the best in your posting over in Seoul. My Perth US Asia Centre prides itself on strengthening relationships between Australia and countries in the Indo-Pacific, and you're making a huge contribution to that. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you so much. It's great to be here, Hayley, and good luck with the rest of the podcast.